All right, welcome back to our discussion of evidence and experts. What we're going to do now in this video is talk about what it means to judge expert knowledge or to evaluate what experts have to say. Given the obvious facts that we are often wrong, each and every one of us makes mistakes, and we all have cognitive biases, including experts, then this suggests that we need to rely upon some sort of a criteria that would help us to evaluate or to judge what experts have to say. So we can begin then by considering four potential criteria. These are criteria that are offered by Vaughan in the text, but it looks like these criteria are really helpful insofar as they're pragmatically useful. All right, so what are these criteria? The first criteria that we can use when evaluating expert knowledge, expert opinion, tells us that we need to consider the education and the training that the expert has. Where did the expert go to university? Where did they get their education? Was it from a reputable institution or from various programs that would be credible for their specific field, whatever that field might happen to be? Or did their education, their training come from a source that is less than established as being credible, or a program that maybe has a reputation of not being reliable? All right, so that's the first basic sort of criteria. What is the education? What is the training of the expert? Is it reputable or not? The second criteria is the experience that the expert has in that particular field, right? Do they have a lot of experience, or are they a novice? And just because you're a novice doesn't necessarily mean that your opinion or your views are false, but certainly we would rely upon somebody that has more experience in a particular field than somebody that is just now beginning in that particular field. So the more experience that you have, that's typically a good criteria to use when we're evaluating an expert's opinion. The third criteria is the reputation that they happen to have amongst their peers. Is that a good reputation? Or do the peers in their particular field recognize that person as being, somebody that is not well established, or somebody that oftentimes may, offer opinions that are dubious, or something that people have reason for doubting, right? So do they have a good reputation amongst their peers, or is it less than stellar? And the fourth criteria is simply the professional accomplishments that the expert has. What kinds of publications do they have? What kind of research and training have they gone through? To what extent are they able to teach in that particular area, whatever that field might be? One thing that I've always said, and I think that it's a pretty widely accepted, is that we actually learn quite a bit about an area when we're able to teach that. If you can teach some subject, then that demonstrates your ability to understand it. And we continue to learn again, oftentimes through teaching. Publications and research is crucial as well because it goes through a peer review process. Still, we have to recognize that these are only partial criteria. They're not perfect, right? Experts can and often are wrong in various ways. In fact, one of the best philosophers that I'm aware of, his name is Putnam, was notorious for constantly changing his mind. So much so that philosophers may be described as Putnamine because they've changed their mind about something. But notice that this is not a bad thing. We should be willing to change our minds or alter our views based upon good evidence. If somebody offers a really good argument or some alternative perspective and it's more convincing than whatever view we previously held, then we should update our set of beliefs to be more consistent with the evidence. And the peer review process that's crucial, blind review and so forth of your peers when they're reading through whatever work you've done, then this is a crucial part because we can at that point update and change what we're arguing or whatever our position might be. And like we've seen previously, every one of us have different biases. We are oftentimes wrong in all kinds of different ways. And so, given that much, this generates another common sense principle that we can use. H. This says, Well, if we have reason to believe that an expert is in some sense biased about something, then we are not justified in accepting that expert's opinion. But then this raises an obvious question. How can we tell when an expert is biased about something? Well, notice that there are no, simple, easy, or hard and fast rules that will help us here. But we can consider various ways in which experts have been biased in the past, and that will help us compile various sort of warning signs that we can use. For instance, the expert might be guilty of simple factual errors or maybe formal errors in their reasoning. If that's the case, it may not be on purpose. Maybe there was just a simple mistake that was made. But that's the kind of warning sign that we can use, something that indicates or flags to us that says maybe we should be careful here. Another point is whether the expert's claims conflict what you already have good reason to believe. And that's because, as we saw in the previous video, we should evaluate different claims and beliefs based upon what we already take ourselves to have good reason to believe, what the evidence suggests. Likewise, we should consider whether the expert adequately supports their views, or if they're just asserting it without any reason or argument. If that's the case, then that should be another clear warning sign that we can use for the very same reasons that we saw in the previous video. Because, as we saw, we should proportion how strongly we believe in some claim to the evidence we have. If the evidence is very strong, then that gives us very good reason to accept that claim, that belief. But if the evidence is weak, if somebody's just asserting something that they believe without any good reason or argument, then we should not too quickly jump on board and believe whatever they happen to say. Additionally, we should consider the experts' writings. Do their writings contain logical contradictions or inconsistencies that we should pay attention to? Because that's sort of a basic threshold that needs to be crossed. We should make sure that whatever beliefs we have do not contain logical errors, contradictions, or inconsistencies. And again, sometimes this may happen unintentionally, but we should still use this as a warning sign. If it does occur, then this is something that we should be aware of. Furthermore, we should be concerned whether or not the expert treats opposing views fairly. If the expert is not being charitable to opposing views, if they're not taking them seriously, if they're dismissing what their opponent happens to say without actually considering the arguments that are being offered against what they happen to believe, well, then it may be the case that they're offering an argument in bad faith. They're not really concerned with what the other position says. Rather, they're just trying to win some argument. And this happens oftentimes when an expert is too strongly dogmatic about some issue. If they're dismissively rejecting other people's views, other opposing views, or if they're intolerant to what other people have to say, then this is another warning signal that we should pay attention to. Additionally, if the expert relies on things like outdated information or bad information, or if the expert in some regard cherry picks data that would help them support their views, even though it's not really being genuine or open to opposing views or what evidence, new contrary evidence might happen to say. Now, with all of that in mind, there are certainly going to be some situations, some questions that we should consider that cannot simply be settled by whatever an expert happens to say. For instance, questions about religion, like whether God exists or what religion is the most appropriate religion for you, or questions about who to love or politics, or maybe questions about how to live your life, what profession you want to go into, or other similar sorts of questions or issues that can't be settled merely by relying upon what an expert happens to say. These are issues that we need to think critically about While we can certainly utilize and think about what experts might say, what opinions they might offer, nonetheless, these choice points in our lives are things that matter to us deeply, right? They are at the core of who we are as individuals. So we can't simply blindly follow whatever the expert says. We can't just say, oh, well, whatever our pastor preaches from the pulpit is what I believe. Rather, if it's something that matters to you personally, you can listen to what the expert says and think about it and evaluate what they say. But ultimately, some of these issues come down to what you believe as a person. So then we need to be careful not to blindly do what they say or too quickly follow whatever advice might be offered. And arguably, this is a fundamental part of good critical thinking, developing your own views and giving reasons and arguments for what you happen to believe, taking ownership of your beliefs based upon good reason, good argument, and utilizing the best evidence that you have available. Now, oftentimes this can be difficult. And I think that it introduces a kind of a distinction that we should be careful about. This is a distinction between fact and opinion. Again, we talked about some of this at the very beginning of the semester, but let's review and make sure that we understand what's going on here. Arguably, terms like facts and opinions are commonly misused in our common way of speaking. For instance, several years ago during the first Trump administration, someone like Kellyanne Conway would insist that, these are alternative facts that we should pay attention to. But that's not using the word fact properly. People commonly say things like, well, that might just be your opinion, but it's not very common for people to say things like, well, that's just your fact. Why is that? Well, because opinions are, in some sense, subjective. People can believe all kinds of different things. But facts are not subjective. Facts are objective aspects about the world, and you cannot have an alternative fact. Facts don't respect what people happen to believe. Right? So here we can say that a fact is literally just some state of affairs about the world. It's some truth apt statement that is true rather than it being false. And so, with regard to facts, both of these are going to be true. Some state of affairs about the world would have to be true in order for it to be a fact. Some statement about the world would have to be true in order for it to be a fact. But notice that opinions are very different. Opinions involve a person's belief about the world, but these do not have to be true. Oftentimes they're false, right? People can have opinions that are ridiculous, right? But that's not the case with regard to facts. All right, so now finally, what I want to do is consider what we might call a kind of hierarchy of reliability as it relates to expert opinion and the evidence that we have available, and whose opinions or beliefs should we trust as it relates to the facts as we have them. So we can divide this hierarchy into three different tiers. The first tier is going to be sort of the best kind of source that we have. The reliability of tier one is based upon well-established facts, articles or reports that are published in peer-reviewed journals or conference proceedings or different books that are published by highly accreditable academic resources like Harvard University Press, Cambridge University, Oxford University, Routledge, Blackwell, Rowman, all of these sorts of resources that we might have with regard to doing research. These are well-established, credible resources because they're peer-reviewed and they oftentimes, if not always, involve blind peer review, meaning that the reviewers don't know whose work they are reviewing. And this is either double blinded or triple blinded. We also have in tier one, typically we have official government or university reports. But notice that I've included here an asterisk, and that's because contemporarily, at least right now, with regard to the Trump administration, we have gotten numerous different government reports with all kinds of falsehoods. Oftentimes, these are generated by ChatGPT. I'm not going to get into a lot of details, but I put the asterisks here because while in the past, government reports and university reports oftentimes were based upon the kind of research that we find in Tier 1, that's not contemporarily the case with what's going on with our government right now. Now, Tier 2 involves news agencies that adhere to very high journalistic standards. These are standards that are regulated. For instance, the AP or Reuters. These are newspapers or magazines that are going to rely upon highly rated agencies. These news agencies have various obligations, official kind of professional standards that they utilize. But at the same point, it's different from Tier 1 because these news agencies, while they rely upon good sources and they have very high standards, they don't go through the same sort of double or triple blind peer review process. So whether it's a newspaper, a magazine, or even a news broadcast, and even some book publishers, this is still very good in terms of it being a good, credible source. We just have to recognize that it's not as high as Tier 1 because of the peer review process. Finally, in Tier 3, we've got non-government groups or organizations. We also have organizations like advocacy groups or political groups. Oftentimes, we have TV and radio, podcasts, social media, advertisements, marketing, or really any kind of a group or organization that lacks the needed credible standards that we have for Tier 1 or Tier 2. Again, I've put the asterisk here because looks like what we find with the Trump administration or contemporary U.S. government, federal government. Now, this may not be the case in all governments, all state or local governments, but certainly we've found all kinds of violations of the standards that we typically would expect of a government organization. So now let's move on to three general rules that we can use to help determine when a source or an expert falls into these three tiers. First, we can consider how many sources does it use and where do those sources come from. Second, is the source anonymous or is it peer reviewed, single, double, or triple blinded reviewed? And then third, is the source willing to make public corrections where a mistake is made? So the reason why I've put the asterisks with regard to our current government is because clear, obvious mistakes were made, and when this was brought to their attention, there was no public correction. This is what we would expect from any kind of a credible source, is to make a public correction. Why would we expect that? It's because we want the best information. We want there to be available to the public good, credible information. And the fact that the government was unwilling to make those sort of corrections shows that really they're not interested in having good information available to the public in that regard, right? So when we find a mistake, we need to make a correction for that mistake. Additionally, we can consider experts as it relates to personal experience. Recall that we need to make this sort of a distinction between statements about the world and statements about our own experience of the world. And this ties directly to what we said previously with regard to facts versus opinions. Arguably, we would want to believe true things and avoid falsehoods, right? So that means that we would want our beliefs to correspond to the facts about the world. But that doesn't mean that this always happens, right? Our own subjective experience of the world may be fallacious in some way. It may be problematic. So what this suggests to us, since our own subjective experience of the world can and often is wrong in all sorts of different ways, then we need to be careful. We need to ask the question, can we trust our own subjective experience? And asking this question generates another common sense principle that we can rely upon. And this final common sense principle states, it's reasonable to accept the evidence provided by personal experience only if there are no good reasons to doubt it. Or that's another way of saying, only if there are no good reasons that are objectively contrary to subjective experience. All right, so with all of this in mind, then I want you to answer the questions for chapter 6 that you get from the text. That will be your assignment for this module. But I also want you to be thinking about and preparing for both the comprehension check that's coming up as well as the final exam. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to address any issues that you might have.